Hello and welcome. My name is James Azimoha and you're watching A News. Let's see your headlines. US President Donald Trump says talks with Iran will resume after cancelling a planned massive military strike. Israeli strikes hit Gaza as ceasefire tensions rise. And French President Emmanuel Macron faces mounting pressure as France battles wildfires. US President Donald Trump says talks with Iran are set to resume later on Monday after he halted planned massive strikes against the country. Trump said the decision followed appeals from Gulf allies to give diplomacy another chance. Iran, however, denies asking the US to return to negotiations.
US President Donald Trump says the United States is returning to the negotiating table with Iran after calling off plans for a major military strike. Speaking to reporters aboard Air Force One, Trump said talks would begin on Monday afternoon. He claimed the US had been preparing what he described as the biggest attack since World War II, but decided to hold back after appeals from Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and, he said, Iran.
I was asked to by Saudi Arabia, by UAE, by Qatar, and by Iran. We were all set to go just about at this time right now, and it would have been a massive attack. We're all set to go, but when the allies ask to call it off, you got to sort of say, well, let's see. And the reason they asked is I think there's a deal. There's a deal on Hormuz, and then there will be a deal on the nuclear, or you might call it the denuclearization of Iran. I call it the denuclearization of Iran.
However, Iran rejected Trump's claim that it asked Washington to cancel the planned strikes. State and semi-official media dismissed the comments as false, insisting Tehran had made no such request. Meanwhile, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said negotiations with Oman over arrangements for the Strait of Hormuz are in their final stages. Iranian officials stressed the talks are focused on shipping routes and do not amount to an agreement to fully reopen the strategic waterway. The strait remains at the center of the crisis after months of conflict between Iran and the United States disrupted one of the world's most important energy corridors. Despite Trump's optimism, it remains unclear where Monday's talks will take place, who will attend, or whether they will produce a broader agreement on Iran's nuclear program.
Iran says talks with Oman are strictly bilateral and do not cover control of the Strait of Hormuz, warning that tensions will persist unless Washington lifts its blockade of Iranian ports and honors the ceasefire agreement. Turaj Shiralulu has more.
Iran's foreign ministry stressed that Tehran is not negotiating with Washington over the control of the Strait of Hormuz, confirming that the ongoing talks with Oman are bilateral. Spokesman Ismail Baghai stressed that there will be no change if the U.S. insists on continuing to blockade Iran's ports and what he called violations of Washington's obligations under the ceasefire Memorandum of Understanding. Speaking at a weekly press conference on Monday, he welcomed China's mediation efforts to de-escalate tension in the region. He said while Tehran appreciates goodwill efforts by the regional and extra-regional countries, Pakistan remains the main channel of mediation. Meanwhile, the official neither confirmed nor rejected reports that Iran is going to receive shoulder-firing ground-to-air launchers from China, as reported in the press last week. He added that Tehran and Beijing have close relations and have signed a pact on strategic cooperation. During the briefing, the spokesman rejected reports that Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi's visit to neighboring Iraq on Monday has an agenda to negotiate regional developments. According to Baghai, the visit is a routine trip to take part in the annual Arba'in morning ritual to pay his respect to the shrine of Imam Hussein in Karbala. Talking about Iran and Ukraine ties after an Iranian commercial ship was hit in the Caspian Sea, Baghai said Kiev's foreign minister claimed the strike was unintentional. However, the spokesman said remarks by other Ukrainian officials suggest that it was not the case, adding that Iran is waiting for further facts to decide on its response. Turaj Shiralilu from Iranian Foreign Ministry for A News.
Now, OPEC Plus says it will increase oil production from next month, with 7 member countries agreeing to raise supplies to global markets. Saudi Arabia, Russia, Iraq, Kuwait, Kazakhstan, Algeria and Oman agreed to the increase during an online meeting. The move is part of a plan to ease voluntary production cuts introduced in April 2023. The cuts total 1.65 million barrels a day and will remain in place until the end of 2026. This is the 6th consecutive month of increased production. OPEC Plus says it may adjust output if market conditions change, with the next meeting set for the 6th of September. Now, Britain's economy could face a sharp slowdown if disruptions to shipping through the Strait of Hormuz continues into the next year. A new forecast by Ernst & Young warns that a prolonged closure of the key global trade route would drive up energy costs, fuel inflation, and could even push the UK economy into contraction. Zainab Farizada has more.
Britain's economy could shrink in 2027 if the Strait of Hormuz does not reopen to shipping before the middle of next year, according to a new forecast from EY. The accountancy firm's economists say a prolonged disruption to one of the world's most important oil shipping routes would push up oil and gas prices, keeping inflation higher for longer and weighing on economic growth. EY's central forecast assumes the strait reopens within the next couple of months. Under that scenario, the UK economy is still expected to grow over the next 2 years, with inflation reaching a lower peak later this year. However, if the strait remains closed into early or mid-2027, EY predicts UK growth will slow this year before the economy contracts next year. Inflation could climb above 6% by the end of 2026, adding to pressure on households and businesses. EY also expects the Bank of England to keep interest rates on hold for the rest of this year before beginning to cut them next year under its central forecast. The projections are broadly in line with the diverse scenarios published by the Bank of England last week, which examined the impact of significantly higher oil and gas prices. Even in that scenario, the bank forecasts the economy would continue to grow next year. Also, inflation would remain elevated. For now, economists say much depends on developments in the Middle East. The longer uncertainty around the Strait of Hormuz continues, the greater the risk that higher energy prices will spill over into the wider economy, affecting everything from transport and manufacturing to household bills. Zainab Farizada, A News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
To unpack what this pause in attacks really means and whether Washington is negotiating from strength or trying to manage the optics, we're joined now by David Rosenthal, political analyst, joining us from Bogota, Colombia. Good to have you, sir.
Thank you for the invitation. How are you?
Fine, thank you. Now, Trump has now been persuaded by Gulf allies to delay another major attack. What leverage do those states actually have over Washington at this stage?
I think that the Gulf monarchies that possess more influence than we assume. They are not dictating U.S. foreign policy, but they are indispensable partners in energy markets. So the regional security, intelligence cooperation, and the broader effort to contain Iranian expansion without triggering a regional catastrophe. A direct call between Trump and Riyadh ahead of this pause illustrates exactly how that leverage operates in practice, not through public pressure, but through private appeals from a partner Washington cannot afford to alienate. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar understand that another large scale military operation could devastate the Gulf's economic ambitions and energy infrastructure. So their message to Washington is straightforward: pressure Iran, but avoid a war whose cause will be borne first by America's closest regional partners.
Now, Washington says Iran asked for the pause, while Tehran says there are no talks with the United States. How do you reconcile those two positions?
I think that there is no contradiction if one understands how diplomacy functions in the Middle East. Wars, public rhetoric, and private diplomacy often move in opposite directions. So, Iran has strong domestic and ideological reasons to deny direct engagement with Washington, particularly after years of portraying the United States as its principal adversary. So, indirect communication through intermediaries such as Oman has long been the accepted mechanism for exactly this kind of exchange, allowing both governments to negotiate without either having to own the negotiation publicly. We are watching this play out in real time. So Trump said that talks will resume today, and Tehran has already denied it. That is not a contradiction breaking the pattern; is more the pattern.
All right, now the Gulf states want the war contained, but they also depend on the United States for security. And has that changed the relationship of both countries?
So it has reinforced an existing trend rather than transformed. Gulf governments continue to rely on American military power as the cornerstone of their security, but they increasingly seek strategic autonomy. They are diversifying diplomatic and economic relationships with actors such as China, you know. So Beijing is very important in this equation. And so this diversification is more symbolic than substitutive. No partner currently replaces the American military umbrella over the Gulf. And Gulf capitals know it. The lesson from repeated regional crises is that they cannot rely exclusively on military deterrence. They also need active diplomacy to prevent conflicts from reaching their own territory.
Now, David, this is another pause after months of military confrontation. What does this pattern tell us about the limits of military pressure on Iran?
The military force can impose significant costs on Iran's leadership and its regional proxies. So it has not fundamentally, but is not really fundamentally altered Tehran's. Now, every escalation has demonstrated that military pressure alone is insufficient to produce lasting political outcomes. So, Iran has repeatedly shown an ability to absorb punishment, adapt, and continue pursuing its regional influence through asymmetric means. Without a broader diplomatic and strategic framework, military operations tend to create pauses rather than permanent solutions.
Now, how much harder does another failed pause make it for Trump to threaten military action credibly the next time?
I think for this of Trump of creating that military threat is in the next time, the credibility depends less on rhetoric than on consistency. So, and that erosion is already visible. Trump described the cancel operation as the biggest strike since World War II, and then promised talks would begin today. A promise Tehran denied within hours. That is not hypothetical risk to his credibility. It is happening in real time. If this pattern of grand announcements followed by walkbacks continues, adversaries may conclude that Washington prefers de escalation over sustained military confrontation. The United States retains overwhelming military capabilities, but the credibility of future threats will ultimately depend on whether the administration demonstrates a willingness to act if its red lines are closed.
Thank you. That was David Rosenthal, political analyst, joining us from Bogota, Colombia. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
All right, after the break, we'll take a look at fresh Israeli strikes across Gaza, despite reported progress on the ceasefire. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now, Israeli strikes hit several areas across Gaza on Sunday, despite reported progress towards the second phase of the ceasefire agreement.
Israeli airstrikes struck several areas across Gaza on Sunday, with attacks reported from the north to the south of the Strip. That's according to local authorities. Mahmoud Basal, spokesperson for Gaza's civil defense, said Israeli drones and helicopters carried out more than 10 strikes. He said residential apartments, tents sheltering displaced people, civilian vehicles and gatherings were hit. Local sources said those killed included Kamal Abu Muaylik, identified as a Hamas commander, and his wife, who died when their apartment in Deir al-Bala was targeted. Residents searched through the debris, disillusioned about the future.
They said there was a truce, but where is the truce? This truce is just us, collecting corpses, collecting flesh, collecting brains, dismembered men and hands. Why?
Hamas calls on mediators and guarantors of the ceasefire agreement to take action, accusing Israel of violating the deal. The strikes have also drawn international reaction. Turkey's foreign ministry said Israel's continued strikes show that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government has no intention of making peace with the Palestinians. In a statement, the ministry accused Netanyahu's government of seeking to displace Palestinians from their homeland and prevent peace and stability in the region. The ministry called on the international community to take a stronger stance against what it described as Netanyahu's expansionist and militarist approach. The attacks came after Hamas said it had agreed to the latest version of a roadmap for the second phase of the ceasefire agreement following negotiations. Israel had not immediately commented on the strikes.
Russia and Ukraine have exchanged another wave of attacks, leaving civilians dead and key infrastructure damaged on both sides. Here's the latest from the conflict.
Russian officials say Ukrainian forces launched an air attack on Belgorod on Monday. They said more than 1,600 attacks had killed 14 civilians and injured more than 100 on the wider region over the past week. 3 civilians were killed and 2 wounded in a separate overnight attack on the Russian-occupied Crimean Peninsula, according to its Russia-installed governor. In the Vladimir region, Russian retailer Wildberries said one of its logistics facilities was hit. Staff were evacuated to safety with no casualties reported. Russia's transport ministry said drone strikes on vessels had heightened tensions in the Sea of Azov and that measures were being taken to maintain freight traffic in the Azov Black Sea basin. Moscow also claimed its forces struck 3 ships carrying military goods in Ukraine's part of the Black Sea and a cargo vessel at the port of Mykolaiv. The developments followed deadly Russian attacks on Ukrainian cities on Sunday and Monday. In the latest strike, a Russian attack on a petrol station in Ukraine's Dnipropetrovsk region killed 3 people, according to the regional governor. Russian troops have stepped up their strikes on fuel stations across Ukraine in recent weeks. 8 Russian guided bombs struck Zaporizhzhia within 90 minutes on Sunday. That's according to Regional Governor Ivan Fedorov. In Slovyansk, 3 people were killed and 4 injured when another guided bomb struck the city center, destroying a house and damaging the surrounding area.
Now, Russia's Northern Fleet has held military drills in the Barents Sea, testing strikes against mock enemy ships. The drills involved warships, military aircraft, and the Bastion missile system. The fleet says aircraft first found the targets before Russian forces launched missiles from more than 300 kilometers away. It says all targets were hit. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says Washington will seek to restart Russia-Ukraine peace talks in the coming weeks, despite both sides remaining far apart.
You're going to see some efforts over the next few weeks to see if we can't restart talks between the two sides and bring this war to an end. But we also understand that both sides have some pretty strong red lines, and until we can bring those red lines a little closer together, we're not going to be there yet. But we're ready to go, and the president's told his team, if you see an opportunity to be a force that brings about some momentum behind peace talks, let's do it.
Now, Hungary is facing an energy crisis after record low water levels on the Danube forced its only nuclear power plant to slash output. The government is asking homes and businesses to cut electricity use as another heat wave approaches. Pablo Guterres has more.
Well, Hungary is entering one of the most challenging weeks for its energy system in decades. Behind me is a country that gets about half of its electricity from a single nuclear power plant. But today, that plant is running at only a fraction of its normal capacity because there is not enough water in the Danube River to cool its reactors. The PAX nuclear power plant has operated for more than 40 years, and this is the first time that record low river levels have forced such a drastic reduction in production. The Danube has fallen to historic lows after months of drought and heat across Central Europe. In Budapest, the river recently dropped to just 23 centimeters, the lowest level ever recorded. Near PAX, water levels are expected to fall below the minimum needed for normal cooling operations. That matters because nuclear power is the backbone of Hungary's electric system. Solar energy has expanded and can supply a large share of the demand during sunny afternoons. But once the sun goes down, the country depends on nuclear power, natural gas, and imported electricity to keep the lights on. Now, Prime Minister Peter Mayer says the next 5 days will be critical, with temperatures expected to reach 40 degrees Celsius, that's 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, the government has asked households and businesses to reduce electricity use, and more than 300 companies, including MOL, that's the state oil company, Samsung, SDI, Audi, and Denso, have already cut their power consumption, reducing demand by about 400 megawatts. Now, officials say mandatory restrictions are not needed right now, but they remain an option if pressure on the grid increases. Now, the economic cost could also be significant. Members of the governing TISA party estimate Hungary may spend between 315 million to 630 million US dollars on imported electricity if the shutdown continues. For A News, Pablo Gutierrez, Budapest, Hungary.
Now, across southern Europe, wildfires are stretching emergency services to their limits and forcing thousands of people from their homes. Greece, Spain, Portugal, and France are all battling fast-moving blazes as extreme heat and strong winds continue to fuel the fires.
Southern Europe is battling widespread wildfires after record heat and drought. Thousands of hectares of forest have burned in Greece, Spain, and Portugal. Homes have been damaged and tens of thousands of people have been evacuated. In Greece, 2 firefighting helicopters collided during a firefighting operation. The crash happened near the coastal village of Sartha. A Greek and a Danish national were killed. A Greek and a British national from the second helicopter survived. Wildfires northwest of Athens have been burning for a fourth day. The fire spread from Porto Germano to the settlement of Venitza and a military firing range. More than 100 homes have been destroyed and thousands of people have been evacuated. Officials are investigating whether sparks from an electricity transmission network may have caused the fire. In Spain, wildfires caused major damage across several regions throughout July. Large areas of forest burned in Catalonia, Aragon, Madrid and Valencia. Firefighters in Catalonia have brought about 70% of the most dangerous part of the fire, near La Bisbal d'Empordà, under control. In Aragon, the fire burned more than 15,000 hectares. Around 80,000 people left their homes in the Madrid and Avila regions. Recovery work is continuing in the Madrid region. Around 28,000 hectares were damaged. Forests, campsites and other facilities around the San Juan Reservoir were badly affected. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez said the national emergency in the Avila and Madrid regions had ended. However, the country is now experiencing its fourth heat wave of the summer. High temperatures, low humidity and strong winds are increasing the risk of new fires. Portugal is also facing a difficult situation. A wildfire near Vuzela spread across several municipalities. Nearly 1,000 firefighters were deployed to tackle the blaze. On the Greek island of Crete, 3 firefighters were killed while battling wildfires driven by strong winds. Residential areas on the island of Lesbos have also been evacuated. In southern France, a new wildfire near the city of Carcassonne burned more than 100 hectares. The A61 motorway has been closed and nearby areas are being evacuated. Scientists say record heat, drought and strong winds are helping wildfires spread more quickly across southern Europe.
Now, Türkiye has stepped up its response to its recent devastating wildfires, with prosecutors investigating dozens of forest blazes across the country. The authorities say multiple suspects have been arrested. Adamur reports from Istanbul.
Turkish Justice Minister Hakan Gürlek says judicial investigations are underway into 44 separate forest fires that have broken out across 16 provinces since the beginning of June. Writing on social media, Gürlek said prosecutors had identified 29 suspects in connection with the blazes. 6 of those suspects have been arrested, he said, while 9 others have been released under judicial control measures. Another 6 remain in custody pending investigation, according to the Justice Minister. Gürlek noted that investigations were being coordinated by the Justice, Interior, and Agriculture ministries, as prosecutors work with the relevant institutions to determine the cause of the fires. He said the Department of Natural Disasters and Accidents, which functions under the Justice Ministry, was closely monitoring each stage of the judicial process. Gürlek said judicial efforts extend beyond crimes against people and property, but also seek to protect the country's forests, natural resources, and what officials describe as Türkiye's green homeland. The investigations follow one of the country's most destructive wildfire seasons in years. In recent weeks, extreme heat, low humidity, and strong winds have fueled blazes across large parts of the country, especially in the Aegean and Mediterranean regions. These, in turn, have caused large-scale evacuations, have damaged forests, farmland, and homes, and stretched Türkiye's firefighting resources. Last month, 10 people were killed, including forestry workers and rescue personnel, while battling a fast-moving blaze in Eskişehir province, marking the deadliest firefighting incident of the year. Authorities have warned that some fires appear to have been caused by human activity, as prosecutors continue to investigate whether negligence or deliberate acts played a role in the latest outbreaks. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Now, France's worst fire season in decades is stretching emergency services, exposing gaps in preparedness and fueling a growing political crisis. This comes as President Emmanuel Macron's approval rating falls to a record low ahead of the 2027 election.
77 years after its worst recorded fire season, France is once again engulfed in flames. Since January, infernos have destroyed hundreds of structures and forced approximately 260,000 people to evacuate, while a breakthrough in the Gironde region enabled nearly 200,000 evacuees to return. Emergency services remain stretched to their limits.
In an exhibition centre in Bordeaux, the largest centre of its kind for those that have been displaced because of the fire. When it comes to the response, French President Emmanuel Macron says that the French people are standing shoulder to shoulder with difficult conditions, winds swirling. First responders say that this kind of outreach, this kind of support to assist crews on the ground is urgently needed as blazes continue to wreak havoc both here in the region of Gironde.
Yet that air support was severely compromised when the crisis began. Official reports confirm nearly half of France's 12 amphibious Canadair water bombers were out of service for maintenance, raising serious questions about federal preparedness. In response, President Emmanuel Macron repeated his stance, asking, who could have predicted? The exact defense he used during the 2022 heatwaves. Critics, however, point out that climate scientists have issued explicit warnings for years. With Macron's approval rating now near 20%, even centrist allies preparing for the 2027 presidential race are notably distancing themselves from the Élysée Palace. And as analysts note, this recurring domestic vulnerability is directly undercutting France's global image.
Internationally, France has long positioned itself at the vanguard of climate diplomacy, from helping architect the Paris Agreement to championing aggressive European Green Deal framework. So really, on the European stage, it undercuts France's moral authority. It forces the government on the defensive, demonstrating that managing climate resilience at home is vastly more difficult than preaching transition targets abroad.
The governance challenge is compounded by a fractured National Assembly split into three uncompromising blocs. On the far right, Marine Le Pen's party criticizes the shortage of equipment, despite having previously voted for civil security budget cuts. On the far left, Jean-Luc Mélenchon is leveraging the disaster to demand an overhaul of the Fifth Republic's constitution altogether. The frustration is shared even within the government's own ranks. Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu publicly warned of a growing risk that citizens feel disgusted by a political class detached from reality. As fierce Mistral winds reignite fires in the southern Var region tonight, the gap between the political debate in Paris and the reality on the ground continues to widen. With more than 24 candidates already jockeying for the 2027 presidency, the ongoing fires are ensuring that disaster management and state readiness will remain at the very center of French politics.
All right, coming up after the break, we'll take a look at the Black Sea Green Energy Corridor as it enters its development phase. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now, the Black Sea Green Energy Corridor has officially entered its development phase, marking a major step towards linking the South Caucasus with Europe through renewable electricity. The move follows government approval of the project's feasibility study by Azerbaijan, Georgia, Romania, and Hungary. The project centers on a 1,115-kilometer submarine cable between Georgia and Romania with a capacity of 1,300 megawatts. Completion is planned for 2032, strengthening renewable energy links between the South Caucasus and Europe. Joining me now to break all of this down is Povana Valieva, member of the Parliament of the Republic of Azerbaijan. Always good to have you, ma'am.
Thank you for having me.
Now let's start with the Black Sea Green Energy Corridor. Now that it's entered the implementation phase, what does that tell us about Azerbaijan's renewable energy ambitions?
Yeah, Azerbaijan has diversified energy resources, including renewable energy sources, wind power, hydropower, and also solar power. And Azerbaijan has committed to have green energy corridors, green energy zones in our country. So, through green energy corridors, of course, we intended to export our green energy potential to Europe, to other countries. And we can say that Azerbaijan's energy export strategy is evolving beyond hydrocarbons, traditional energy. So, following the successful development of oil export in infrastructure and also the southern gas corridor, our country is now pursuing the creation of international green energy corridors that would facilitate electricity exports from renewables. So these include proposed Caspian Black Sea Europe Green Energy Corridor that you mentioned, that the main agreement was signed already, and it promised to export renewable energy from Azerbaijan to Georgia, through Georgia to Romania and to Europe. As well as additional transmission routes. We have another green energy corridor through Turkey and the Nakhchivan Autonomous Republic towards European markets. And also, these projects represent the logical continuation of Azerbaijan's previous energy infrastructure development, such as Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan oil pipeline created the foundation for the southern gas corridor, and the existing energy infrastructure is expected to support a new generation of cross-border electricity transmission systems.
Now, speaking about infrastructure, beyond generating green electricity, what infrastructure and investments will be needed to make the corridor commercially viable?
Yeah, it's very important to have a consistent investments for the green energy corridors. We know that there is a development company that launched, and there are some shares of these countries, Romania, and also as a transit country, Georgia and Azerbaijan have some shares on this development company from other side, and from our Azerbaijan side, there are participants, representatives of electricity project. And Azerbaijan, as I said, has quite significant renewable energy sources, and the territories of Karabakh and Eastern Zangezur occupy a central place in Azerbaijan's renewable energy strategy. Hydropower facilities we have operationalized, and also we have additional projects, including construction of major solar power plants, including also British Petroleum's BP's utility scale solar project in Jabrail, in Sangachal terminal. So we also have another solar panel power infrastructures together with Masdar and Aqua Power companies. So Azerbaijan is generating electricity from quite significant benefit from renewable energy. We also have some installing rooftop solar panels on residential buildings throughout the liberated territories, Karabakh and Eastern Zangezur region. So, supporting the government's broader vision of creating green energy zones. Azerbaijan has declared to have 3 green energy zones in Azerbaijan: Karabakh, Eastern Zangezur, and also Nakhchivan.
Now, still on that, Azerbaijan is positioning itself as an energy bridge between the Caspian region and Europe. How does this project particularly strengthen that role?
Yeah, of course. Azerbaijan's modern energy strategy, it is utmost important to say that, was founded in the early years of independence under the leadership of our national leader, Haydar Aliyev. And Azerbaijan adopted a pragmatic strategy approach by inviting Western major companies in the early 90s to invest in Azerbaijan's oil sector. And this decision enabled Azerbaijan to gain access to capital, advanced technology, technologies and also international experience. And we started to be known as a reliable energy producer in the world. So our traditional energy resources have financed major infrastructure in our country, and also this significantly improved social development in our country. So importantly, we can say that Azerbaijan's energy policy has never been viewed solely through the lens of export revenues, but we view our energy resources as a strategic instrument for consolidating our national sovereignty, improving living standards, and also strengthening our country's international partnerships, because energy today has become one of Azerbaijan's most significant, effective foreign policy instruments, as we saw that our political and also diplomatic ties mainly rely on energy negotiations. Also, we sign different memorandum of understandings with other countries, bilaterally, regionally. So this is an integral part of our energy, our foreign policy diplomacy.
Now, let me get your thoughts on this. How does Azerbaijan balance major renewable investments with its continued focus on oil and gas production?
While the traditional energy remained the backbone of our country's economy, but recent policy has increasingly emphasized diversification through green energy developments. We also have, through when we hosted COP29, we committed to transition gradually to green energy. So we committed increasing renewable electricity potential to 30% by 2030. We already generate 40% of all generated electricity from renewables in our country. So it means that we already achieve our commitment, our targets, and also we targeted expanding solar and wind generation, reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 40% by 2050. So these are our targets, and it requires us promoting green electricity, also green electricity exports to our neighboring regions and also Europe. We signed a memorandum of understanding with European Union as some officials paid visit to Azerbaijan. They signed agreements through green energy supply. It means that it is long-term strategy, energy strategy of Azerbaijan with the European Union.
Thank you. That was Parvana Valieva, member of the Parliament of the Republic of Azerbaijan. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for inviting me.
Now, staying with energy, Georgia's only oil refinery says it's making good on its promise and it's already cutting Russian crude out of its supply chain. Here's more.
Black Sea Petroleum, which operates the Olavi oil refinery, says the Olavi plant received and processed Kazakh crude oil in July and will continue doing so in August. This follows a company statement from early July, which said that starting in August or September, the refinery would begin processing crude oil sourced entirely from non-Russian origins. On July 23rd, the Council of the European Union adopted its 21st sanctions package against Russia. That package named the Olavi refinery directly. The first time a third country refinery has been listed under this measure, by the way. It comes with a 6-month transition period and a transaction ban set to take effect on January 25, 2027. Georgian officials have said all of its operations do not contradict sanctions policy and that the government remains ready to cooperate with the EU institutions. According to Black Sea Petroleum, under a supply agreement signed on July 3rd with an international trading company, the refinery will receive Libyan crude oil between August 20th and 30th. The agreement runs through the end of 2027 with an option to extend. At a press briefing on July 24th, the European Commission said Black Sea Petroleum is in active communication with them and that the company's steps match the transition timeline. Nini Nicolai, Tbilisi, A News.
Now, Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has been reappointed to lead the country's government following the formation of a new parliamentary majority. The move marks the beginning of a new term for Pashinyan, who will now oversee the appointment of his cabinet and set the government's legislative agenda.
Nikol Pashinyan was reappointed Prime Minister of Armenia on Sunday, hours after the government formally resigned as the newly elected National Assembly convened for its first sitting. Armenian President Vahan Khachaturian signed a decree appointing Pashinyan under Article 149 of the Armenian Constitution. Pashinyan was nominated by the ruling Civil Contract Party, which won 64 of the 105 seats in the National Assembly in the 7th of June parliamentary elections. Earlier on Sunday, Pashinyan submitted the government's resignation in accordance with Article 158 of the Constitution, which requires the government to resign on the day the newly elected parliament holds its first session. The resignation and subsequent reappointment are part of Armenia's constitutional process for forming a new government following parliamentary elections. Under the constitution, cabinet ministers will continue serving in a caretaker capacity until a new government is formed. Pashinyan is now expected to nominate members of his new cabinet, after which the government will begin its new term and present its policy agenda.
The U.S. is tightening its visa rules as part of efforts to improve immigration compliance. A new policy requires some visitors to pay a refundable security bond before traveling. Severa Japova has more from Tashkent.
The U.S. State Department has announced that from the 3rd of August, visa bonds will become a permanent requirement for citizens of 50 countries applying for B1 business and B2 tourist visas. Under the program, consular officers may require applicants to pay a refundable bond of $10,000, $15,000 or $20,000. The measure is designed to ensure visitors leave the United States before their authorized stay expires. The deposit is returned automatically once the visa holder departs on time or if the entry to the U.S. is denied. The program was first introduced as a pilot in August 2025, before being expanded earlier this year. The list is based primarily on visa overstay rates. Out of the 50 countries, the largest share, 29, are in Africa. In Asia, it covers 8 countries, including Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan, while Georgia is the only country from the South Caucasus on the list. The program also includes several Pacific Island nations and 6 countries from Latin America and the Caribbean, including Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. According to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, visa overstays among nationals from countries covered by the program fell from more than 45,000 to fewer than 50 during its first 10 months, although visa issued to those countries also declined by 83%. The announcement follows a separate U.S. proposal to introduce a $100,000 financial bond for certain green card applicants as Washington continues studying immigration and visa compliance measures. Severa Japova from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
Now, at least 14 people have been killed in a suspected suicide attack outside a police station in northwestern Pakistan. The blast happened in the Swat district. The dead include 5 police officers and 8 civilians. The assailant is also believed to be among those killed. The Pakistan militant group Tehrik-e-Taliban claimed responsibility for the assault that has left over a dozen injured. Sorry, we have a problem with that story, but anyway, that's all we have for now. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to A News.